So we are finally at week 6, the last week of the summer session, and it has been a really great summer working with all of you. Um, I can't tell you how much I appreciate those of you who have been diligent in getting things done and staying on top of your work. I know it's not easy during the summer session because of so many other things to do, but I appreciate your diligence and your time. And so the one thing I would tell you, if possible, is to let's finish strong, and stay focused, and then enjoy the next few weeks off before semester starts. Um, so I'm excited about that. So hopefully I'll see some of you during the school year, and those of you who are not uh, attending IVC, I wish you the best on your journey wherever that takes you. Um, so today we're going to be covering economics, and we're going to look at the different types of economic systems and just some basics. I'm not trying to get you to be the expert. I just want to give you sort of a understanding of some general basis of what economics is and how it works, and that's where we're headed. So without further ado, let's jump into this. Here we go. So uh, when we talk about economic systems, we're really talking about the money of the country. We talk about it in terms of, people say, what is power? And they say power is money. There's really a lot of truth to that, particularly regarding economic systems, because a lot of what determines the political outcomes and the political decisions that happen in our country are driven by the money. And the money is derived from having a healthy and vibrant economic system. And so that is why we are always in discussion about it and looking at ways in which how to develop it and how to strengthen it. And that's the essence of what we try to do as we explore the various types of systems that are out there and available. So again, when we talk about economic systems, what we're really talking about when we talk about economic systems is really the process of the economic system and how it goes about uh, and how it contends with the process of production, distribution, and the consumption of all types of goods and services that basically dictate how society operates. And it also includes the people, because the people are the ones who are the consumers, and they're also the ones who drive the economy, those who have economic power and control the wealth within the country. So there's a huge amount of institutional framework that's built to sustain the U.S. economy and drive what determines the current economic output and also future output for our economic system. And of course, that's all controlled by politics. And then there are three basic types of systems that we'll be looking at today. And the first one is the capitalist economy, which is what we are. The next we'll be looking at is the socialist economy, and the last one will be the mixed economy, which is basically a combo of the two. So let's jump into this a little bit. So as you can see, when we talk about capitalist systems, we're talking about basically a free market economy that basically means that the production and distribution of the goods and services happens through the free market or open markets. So that means basically there's very little oversight, and basically the market economy or free trade economy, sometimes it's called, gets to dictate the amount of money you can charge for items, and how much you can sell them for and how much you can receive in the price that you purchase at. So by recognizing that, it's just you always want to be in a position where you're making more money than you're spending, right? That's just kind of natural human existence. And then some of the aspects of capitalist economy, including, some of these I would disagree that in terms of there are aspects, but they don't really apply today in the real world. So the right to private property, which means that you're the right to own if you can afford it, right? So that's a little sub note that I would say. You may have the right, but if you don't have any money, then what does private property really mean? Particularly in today's world. Um, there has to be a profit motive. So, why, what are you selling? Why are you selling what you're selling? What's the motive behind how much you charge for what you're selling? Um, and then also freedom of choice. There's a wide range of a particular commodity, then you have the freedom to pick and choose which company you want to purchase from, whether it's computers or detergent. So having the ability to choose from a wider range of goods and services. And then with that comes the aspect of competition. So if that means that people who are selling you the goods and services have to compete for your business. And so that also helps control the price sometimes. Uh, okay. And then the market forces. So if the market is, if it's, depending on what the stock market looks like, how the global economy is doing, how our national economy is doing, the push and pull of whether people can afford to buy services and goods. So all those things play into, but are aspects of a free market system. It kind of sways with the market forces. It looks at the trends within the market to determine what's good to buy today or what's bad to buy today, for example. And then one of the key aspects politically is that in a free market economy means that there's very little government interference. Where some people say that's a good thing, I would argue that there is much problematic with regard to not having some measure of government being involved in the market economy. Because it's always the question, when is enough enough? And in the capitalist system, people are secondary to money. And so without having a balance in there, it's easy for those who in a capitalist democratic system to be exploited by the infrastructure because there's nothing to keep them in place or to drive what they do or how they do what they do. Now, some of the other aspects that are components of the capitalist economy, of course, in the United States, of course, private businesses basically produce the goods and services that we utilize. Almost 2/3 of our nation's output comes from individuals and also are consumed for personal use. And the one thing that keeps a vibrant economy vibrant is having a vibrant middle class to be able to consume the goods and services, and because they can afford to purchase it. And our economy right now, unfortunately, I would argue, is built on indebtedness. And so instead of being in the old days back in the 1950s and 60s, it was built on manufacturing and technology and innovation. Now it's built on keeping the consumer or the everyday citizen in debt. And that's a real problem when you talk about developing an economy based on indebtedness. Granted, it's like, for example, so we have access to credit, and credit allows for us to buy things today and pay for them tomorrow. The reality of that, certainly it bodes well because the interest rate the government charges you, or vis-a-vis the banks, it allows for them to be able to make money on what you buy. So, for example, if you buy a car that costs you $25,000 and you have a certain interest rate, by the time you pay for it, you may have paid 30,000 or 40,000 for that $25,000 car, depending on your credit ability and your interest rates. But then the other aspect that plays in this is the monetization of our society. We live in a capitalist society that everything is monetized. Everything we do, everything we watch is driven by money. And there's I would argue, a dangerous precedent when you have absolute economies that are driven by a particular type of philosophy. Is like when a free market economy is good when the economy is good, when the markets are good and everything is good and going well. They do horribly when they're not. And that's what we all have to face, just like we did in 2008 when we had a huge economic crisis. Then also globally, it also applies as well because most of the top 8 economies in the world, from top 8 countries, basically are all tied together like dinghies on the side of the Titanic. And the bad thing about that is when the Titanic goes down, which is like the United States being the Titanic, then we drag everybody else down with us. But also that applies when other countries that we're tied to, when their economies start to collapse or go bad, then it affects our economy as well. So there's really the codependency that we have is good in some ways, but it's also problematic because of the danger it presents and how we do what we do. In the United States, we have a lot of private ownership of business. So a lot of what drives, even within corporations, a lot of them are privately driven or have individuals who are primarily focused on what drives those economies or their production and the goods and services. So there's always a person behind the scenes, even in corporations, that usually is driving the primary direction and interest of that individual or group. And then again, the federal government, as you can see here in the PowerPoint, the federal government is responsible for the nation's economic defense system. And basically, and all as well as other aspects as well, you know. So, but the main thing we're focused on here is the economic aspect. But you can see there that education, goods, you know, defense and research and all the other aspects that of our society to make them all work in collaboration to benefit to benefit or support the society at large. Uh, and then, you know, in the modern context, we talk about the idea of how private enterprises and private industry are more and more controlling our educational institutions as well. And that's a big problem because, again, they're out for their self-interest more than anything else. Um, you know, and then the leadership within these economic organizations, they're basically watching the economic markets in a free market system to see how they're doing, to then they can decide how they want to where they want to allocate or direct resources or pull them away from to try to keep the economy fluid and not have it, you know, have this that up and down or bottoming effect. They don't want it too high, but they don't want it too low. They want to try and keep it somewhere in the middle. And some of the advantages, as you can see here, of what so I should say supposed advantages of the capitalist economy is that it increases productivity, increases standard of living, flexible system, meaning that it can operate with, you know, within a big gray area, really, so that it has flexible to be able to deal with the changes in the market. There's very little interference by the states. Um, there is a good use of resources, sometimes too good use of resources. It allows the growth for entrepreneurship, and the technological advancement is also a positive. However, I would say that's also a risk because many times we've seen already that when the technology is not controlled by a particular corporation or entity, they will try to block it so that it can't be brought forward until they can have control of it. And that happens a lot. We always think of free market as basically anybody can create and develop stuff. It doesn't always quite work that way. So you see some of the disadvantages. Of course, it leads to more inequality, economic inequality, leads to monopolies, meaning that you have these, which we see more and more today, where you have big businesses buying out smaller companies and absorbing their resource, and then because they control monopolize one aspect of the economy, they can set the price point at which they sell or buy commodities. So that's again leads to more inequality. Of course, you can have potential of depressions, meaning economic depression. You can have mechanization and automation can be problematic, the implementation of those things. Uh, the social welfare of the people is completely ignored for the most part, and policies are basically end up hurting the people much more than helping them. And that's more or less our fault because we let these people can sort of conduct business without any checks and balances. Also, you know, you can exploit the labor class. So basically, instead of paying them a decent wage, you can pay them less and, you know, expect more from them. So they don't get as much for their money as they did, particularly in today's economy, because a worker who makes 20 bucks an hour, you're making that 15, 20 years ago. Well, price of housing was, you know, half of what it is now. So your money doesn't go as far now as it used to go. And then again, it does a very poor job of dealing with basic social needs. And these are some of the disadvantages to this particular system. Now, the socialist economy is set up a little differently because in the socialist economy, you know, the means of production are owned and operated by the state. So the government or the state or the country, the federal government would basically control and dictate and operate the economy or the means of production within these types of systems. All the decisions are basically done by a central authority. It would probably be our Congress in the United States if we had operate under this type of infrastructure or economic system. It's also, you know, called, you know, planned or a command economy. And even though you would say having a certain structure that is controlled by the state, there may be some benefits to it, but there are also some problems because most states tend to be very bureaucratic, or most countries tend to be very bureaucratic. Uh, Some of the primary aspects of this socialist economy are it's based on the social welfare systems to basically provide for your people and protect them regarding their economic base and their support system. You have very limited rights to your private ideas or private implementation of production. Most of that's controlled or dictated by the state. And again, the central planning, a centralized organization is what's key, one of the major key aspects of the socialist economy or economic system. Some of the advantages of the socialist system, of course, economic stability, because it's a planned economy controlled by the federal government, if you would. Uh, you can maximize social welfare, which means you're protecting your people and providing a way of life for them, just even if they're struggling economically. Uh, there's no monopolies within this system, or very little. So because the government controls it. Uh, Most of the basic needs of the society and the individuals within the society are met by the government, and there's not an extreme level of inequality. Doesn't mean that everybody's living in exactly the same, but there's a balance that exists within the two different systems. Within the different systems, or I should say from rich to poor, there's not as far wide a disparity as there is in capitalist system. Of course, some of the disadvantages, it tends to be very bureaucratic. It tends very limited amount of freedom to no freedom, depending on the system, in terms of the economic input and output within these states or nations. The absence of technology, I wouldn't say necessarily that it's absent as much as it is. Most of it's antiquated, and the use of the technological innovation with regard to economic systems is problematic. And then the lack of competition. And this is also potentially a problem, but noting that the lack of competition means that the government sets the price, and there is no, but whatever it is what it is, and there is no competition to try to drive the cost or the price down, or have it increased because the government controls or dictates what that price point will be, and that's how the system operates. And then lastly, the mixed economy. And the mixed economy is basically a combination of both systems. And most of the time we see this in Europe and Japan and these democratic systems that that have systems that have a balance of both. So they'll incorporate aspects of both economic systems into a collapsing common system. And usually what it is simply means that they try to find a balance between money and people, so that they recognize the need to have a vibrant economy. So they have aspects of capitalism that they fundamentally utilize to build their economy, but they also take into account what the needs of the people are. So some of the aspects within a mixed economy, for the most part, the resources are owned by the government as well as private individuals. So you can have some privatization in addition to having a government-controlled bureaucracy or economic bureaucracy. Like, for example, and the example I'll use will be in England. So in England, they have, under Margaret Thatcher, they started to privatize some of their national systems. So, like, for example, the railroad system was terrible in England for decades and decades and decades. But when they privatized it, the private entities made it a cost profit center instead of a loss center. And they were able to get the trains running on time more efficiently because private organizations didn't have all the government red tape and bureaucracy to get things done, or tied up so long to get get new and innovative things up and running. So oftentimes they work collaboratively together, or they work hand in hand with one another to make sure that the two systems operate, co-equally. So in terms of who decides what they're going to produce, of course, well, that's done by businesses. The businesses decide what products are going to be advantageous for the system to make money on and profit from. And then the other question is, who decides to produce goods and services? Well, The businesses do, but the governments also regulate certain industries, not all industries, but certain industries, particularly those that have a national impact. The government tends to have more direct influence in how the private how the private entities or corporations do what they do and the policies that they operate under. Uh, so there may and the goods and services that are made or utilized or created are to support the consumers within their both their communities but also globally when they have, of course, trade with other countries. Some of the advantages of a mixed economy, as you can see, both the producers and consumers have control of the system. They get to choose what they want to produce and what they want to consume. Uh, but however, the production of consumption of harmful goods and services can be controlled by the central government. So they can, if there's anything that's being developed that is not going to be for the betterment of society or that it has a health risk factor, the government can block it. So they have government control oversight even over the private sectors. And then the mixed economy is also it's helpful in increasing the national production of the country. Both public and private sectors have really try to work hard to bring about more production to support the society and distribute those goods and services across the board. Some of the primary advantages, of course, the mixed economies have less income inequality, which is an important aspect of having balance in your social system. Because if you have economic balance, then the people are going to be happier. They're going to be able to. There's going to be more political stability as a result of it, and both the private enterprises and the government both gain greater legitimacy from the people. And then consumers are protected from consumption of harmful products because the government does have oversight. And the consumers in these societies tend to do a better job of having oversight too over what is agreed to or not agreed to by the government. Some of the disadvantages, okay, so mixed economies, of course, private enterprises have to have a lot more difficulty because of the government interference into what they're trying to do. So while private enterprises may be more innovative and be able to be less bureaucratic, sometimes the government, depending on what it is, will have a greater say or still get involved and slow down the process, or they still have to check with the government to get things done. So it can really still become, somewhat bureaucratic. And then other part is that, well, since the welfare of society is important in a mixed economy, that's one of the major aspects is how you take care of your people. It leads to lower than optimal use of resources because the government basically has controls and utilizes those resources for the production of goods and services that are beneficial to their people. Um, and so they do that for that particular reason as opposed to producing goods and services for the benefit of the economy. So it's driven more by the people than by the economy. So again, because of that, you can actually lower your economic reality, and you may not be as profitable, and your gross national product of your country may be less as a result of it. This just gives you some example of the foundations of the mixed economy started in India with the industrial policies that happened in 1948. This chart gives you a breakdown of the capitalism, socialism, and mixed economy. This is really an important one I would have you look at so you could do some sort of comparison. I think it's really a good aspect of that. And that's it. So that is our last chapter for this session. And I look forward to all of you hopefully running across you in the fall. Have a good rest of your summer, and I will see you hopefully soon. Take care.